Howard Birchman with Housing Innovations. We've been working with the Rhode Island Continuum of Care on a variety of matters, but especially this HUD NOFO for well over the past decade. So it's a great pleasure to be with you all, although I'm sure there are much more fun things that we could be talking about, but this is important. So I've got a pretty brief presentation this morning because I really want to leave as much time as possible for folks to have questions and have discussion about it. But what I really, obviously, we tried to get ahead of things and issued our request for applications prior to the NOFO coming out. Did not really expect to release the NOFO on schedule, but you know, they surely surprise us. So they did indeed release the NOFO on the evening of June the 1st. And we've been working on absorbing it and moving forward. Of course, as all of you know, there are a lot of key elements to this competition that HUD has still not done. So, for example, they have not released the grant inventory worksheet, which is critical. That tells us all the grants that are eligible for renewal in this competition. It'll also give us the HUD official annual renewal amount. That's the sum total of all the grants that are eligible to be renewed in this competition. That annual renewal amount number is very important because it's going to determine certain things like how much funds we can have in tier 2, how many bonus dollars we can apply for, all kinds of critical things like that. But we don't have that information from HUD yet. We are waiting it. And the other thing that's really important is, as all of you know, we do this application through the eSNAPS online application portal. And in order for us to do anything, they need to open up that application portal. And in addition to which, they really haven't told us the specific questions that we need to answer, both for our individual project applications, the things that you all are going to be working on, as well as the larger continuum of care application, which they score and is critical to the outcome of this process. So they released some information. We're going to talk about that information that we have, but there's quite a bit of stuff that has yet to release, and we will wait for that to come. And certainly as anything critical comes out from that, we'll certainly be sharing it with the CRC. Certainly when we get that report telling us what the grant inventory worksheet is, that will be critically shared, because for those who are able to renewal grants, remember that the numbers that are shown on the grant inventory worksheet, especially the total amount for the grant, it's a critical number. That's the maximum amount you can apply for. It's the amount you should apply for in this competition. So we're waiting for that to come. Okay. So what are some of the key things that we know coming out of this competition? First, we already knew this. It's going to be much more competitive this year. In years past, tier 1 was set at 90%, over 90%, meaning overwhelmingly the funds that were available were pretty much assured to the COC. Now only 60% of the funds that the COC has received are assured that they're going to be renewed in this competition. We're clearly going to get far more than 60% of our funds, but those are the only funds that are guaranteed to us. In recent competitions, certain kinds of grants, just such as those for the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, were not competitively awarded, so those grants were assured. That's not the case this year. Those Youth Homeless Demonstration grants are competitively awarded. They need to be ranked along with everything else. Depending on where they're ranked, they may or may not be funded in the competition. And also this year, some of you may remember, a number of years back, we competed under a special NOFO for unsheltered and rural homeless, and those grants are also eligible for renewal in this competition. They're also doing some slightly more, a little more subtle ways in which they're going to redirect funding away from some of the larger COCs to some of the smaller COCs. They established basically for especially the smaller ones, a minimum amount of bonus funds that they can apply for. That hasn't been the case before. So some of the smaller COCs can actually apply for a larger bonus than they would otherwise be allowed to. Otherwise, the bonus is not supposed to be greater than 15% of your annual renewal demand. But for COCs that don't have that much money, they set a minimum amount of bonus funding, which is above, in many cases will be above that 15% number. So just ways in which HUD is probably going to seek to shift funds around from some COCs to others. And a lot of COCs are anticipating that they will actually end up with fewer funds after this competition. That certainly is not what we want to have our outcome to be, but it is definitely a possibility. So yes, so one of the things that's really significant in this competition and very different than they've done it before are these significant sums of money that are set aside for special purposes. First set aside is for the DV bonus. That's not unusual. They've always had a set aside for the DV bonus. What's a little unusual is the DV bonus is actually double what it normally is. Normally it'd be around the $50 million or so mark. This year, they basically got 2 years worth of funding to award. So the amount of DV bonus is substantially higher. There has always been a requirement that HUD spend at least 10% of their funds on permanent housing for families serving children because of the way the competition has always been arranged with the priority for renewing permanent housing grants. That's never been an issue for HUD before. It's highly unlikely that this $430 million set aside for permanent housing for families serving children is going to be a barrier. It's most folks believe that HUD will reach that $430 million figure with the grants that are already ranked in tier one. And that $430 million set aside is not going to factor into the other competition. For those of you who were able to attend the National Alliance webinar, I think it was the day before yesterday, these days blend together a fair amount. They made it very clear that in years past, HUD was funding over $900 million in that category. So it seems highly likely that they'll be able to achieve $430 million with just the permanent housing projects that are going to be ranked in tier one. Virtually every COC, for reasons we'll discuss, is putting a huge amount of their renewal, if not all of their renewal funds, renewal permanent housing in tier one. So we'll probably meet that 430 without any implications. The next set aside is significant. Basically, they're taking close to 1/3 of all the possible money in this competition and setting it aside for new projects. And most of that is setting aside for new transitional housing and supportive services only projects that are ranked in tier two. So get that. I mean, basically that 1.3 billion, which is close to the entirety of the amount of funds that we expect to be available in tier two, is going to be prioritized towards new transitional housing and supportive services only projects. So obviously, no surprise, what we're going to we don't want to rank new transitional housing and new supportive services in tier one because the set aside is for those projects that are ranked in tier two. Then what HUD says is if they don't come up with 1.3 billion in new transitional housing or supportive services only projects, they're then going to go and select the other new projects that are in tier two, any other new, so new permanent housing or new HMIS, any other new project that is in tier two until they reach that $1.3 billion set aside. Then as soon as they have 1.3 billion in new projects, they're going to remove all the new projects that are remaining in the ranking list and go down and fund whatever is remaining, which will be, a small number of renewal projects. Again, the Alliance estimated that when all is said and done, once they've funded tier one, once they've done this set aside, we're looking at around maybe a couple of $200 million, which is real money, of course. But in a national competition like this, it goes by very, very quickly. So the expectation is grants that are other than new and grants that are other than new transitional housing and supportive services only that are ranked in tier two are much less likely to be funded because they're only going to get funded after they've gone through and funded all the new projects that are ranked in tier two. Okay, so what does this tell us as far as our ranking is concerned? Well, basically, it tells us that we've got to put permanent housing that wants to renew have got to be ranked in tier one. We've been talking about this for months now, as you all know, our first fear, because what they told us in 2025 was they were going to limit permanent housing renewals to no more than 30% of our renewal demand. They ended up not doing that in the competition. Instead of doing that, they basically set this sort of did it through the back door by setting aside all those funds for new projects, making it impossible to renew all of the existing permanent housing projects. So we're going to put permanent housing projects in tier one to the extent that we can and fit them within that 60%. We've also got to put HMIS and our coordinated entry grants into that tier one, because if we don't do that, they are not going to get funded and they are critical to the operation of the COC. And we're going to try and get as much of the YHDP funding as we can in tier one. At the same time, any grants, current permanent housing grants that are interested, are willing to, or would consider transitioning those grants from permanent housing to one of those new categories, the new transitional housing or the new supportive services only grant, are strongly encouraged to do so. Again, we know there's a set aside for those new projects in tier 2. And so the likelihood of those new projects in tier 2, which again remember back in the days, tier 2 was only 5, 6, 7, 8% of our annual renewal demand. It's 40% this year. So obviously, far many more grants in tier 2 are going to get funded than they traditionally do. Same thing for YHDP grants. They're going to count the same way. So if a YHDP grant would be willing to consider transitioning from, say, a joint component of joint transitional rapid rehousing to just a transitional housing component, they would submit that as a new project application, and then that would be prioritized for funding in tier 2. And again, leave us room in tier 1 to get the permanent housing ones that we can't shift, as well as get that critical infrastructure project funded in tier 1. As an incentive for folks to transition their permanent housing grants into these new project types in tier 2. The first grants that will be listed in tier 2 are going to be those from grantees who had an existing grant but are willing to transition into one of those new project types. Those grants will be ranked at the top of tier 2, making it much, much more likely that they will get funded in this competition. We understand people making that transition are taking a slight risk. There's no question about it. But we want to mitigate that risk as much as possible, as much as we can, by ranking them high in tier 2. And then after we have done all the transition grants, then in tier 2, we'll use the remainder of tier 2 to fund other new THSSO, or even if there's room, new permanent housing grants there. But again, we want to emphasize the transitional housing and the supportive services only, because that's going to get picked first by HUD before they do it. Then if folks really want to run the risk of staying with the renewal grant, even though it is ranked in tier 2, we'll rank those below the new projects only because we want to get as many of those new projects funded as possible. And then finally, it's not because we're de-emphasizing the importance of the domestic violence bonus projects, but the way HUD is doing it is the HUD is going to first fund the planning grants. The second thing they're going to do is go down the project priority list looking for DV bonus grants up to a total of 104 million, which I said is much larger, double what it has been in the past. So if we rank those at the bottom, they're still going to have a very, very good chance of being funded, because those are the first grants that HUD is going to go through the list and select for funding. So that's why the DV bonus projects, and not because it isn't critical to meet the needs of survivors, it's because the HUD funding process is going to select those grants first. Again, the significant changes from what we expected, I mentioned this already. There is not a cap on permanent housing renewals, but there is this backdoor that they've done by this set aside. And I know when we talked about transitional housing before, when in the 2025 preview of the NOFO, HUD was indicating that people in transitional housing would be expected to engage in 40 hours of structured, individualized services program each week. HUD halved that down to 20 hours, which certainly makes it a much more workable number. And they kind of broadened it. They said, it could be services, it could be activities, employment. I mean, basically having at least 20 hours of some form of structure in each participant's life. And on top of that, although any project that is a new project ranked in tier 2 is going to be individually scored. That individual score is going to have 3 components associated with it. One, this is the way it's worked in the past. Half of that score is going to be based on whatever the score of the COC application receives. 40 of the 100 points are going to have to do with where it is ranked and how much money is being requested. And the final 10 points are whether or not the program is going to have a requirement that participants engage in services. In these tier 2 projects, they're all getting 100 points. No one can afford to lose 10 points right off the top. So if a project is in tier 2, be advised, it is highly important that you're able to say that you're going to require people to participate in services. Because if you don't say that, you will lose those 10 points and really be at a competitive disadvantage in getting tier 2. Oh, and I should have just waited for my next slide. But this is all the information that I just verbally gave you, but you'll have this, and we'll send out these slides as soon as this is over. In addition to that, HUD is emphasizing certain project quality factors and things like that. There are these threshold quality factors. Clearly, when you submit a new project application, we'll review it to make sure that we've met all those project quality factors. But that is very clearly indicating that if you don't meet the project quality factors, I've seen, you've all got the, I'm sure you've got the notification of funding opportunity. Take a look at those. There's different project quality thresholds for each project type: transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, etc. Have got slightly different project quality thresholds. When you're doing your application for these, pay attention to those. Again, you have to, HUD says there's a minimum score. You've got to get like 5 out of 7, 4 out of 5 of those points in order for HUD to consider the application. But they're also saying that they're not going to sign a contract with you until you satisfy every one of those project quality thresholds. So don't, even though the NOFO says you can get 4 out of 5, HUD is saying they're not going to sign a contract with you unless you actually are able to, say you're going to do every one of those. So pay attention to that as well.
Howard, could I just jump in for 1 second about
Why
that? If
not?
you can go back to the last slide.
I can, maybe. Yes.
So that was great information. Thank you. And please, everyone, especially, take a look at that page 63 of the NOFO and read those threshold criteria that HUD has carefully. Howard is instructing you exactly correctly about the NOFO and what it says. And I just want to point out that many or some of the things included on that page are things that have been challenged historically in litigation. So if one or a few of those criteria are a decision maker for your agency, we'd encourage you to continue to apply and be transparent with our local COC in that process. We want to make sure we get as many strong applications as possible. And I'm certainly not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not telling you anything about future litigation because I don't know what I don't know. But I just wanted to call attention to that so we can watch it carefully together as we move forward. But we really want you all to be submitting the strongest applications you can at this point. And we realize there are some details in those thresholds that might, affect different agencies here locally in different ways. So I hope that's helpful to hear, and we'll keep in good touch as we hear any developments on that.
Yep. And as you all know, and as I said, the process is you develop the applications, you submit to the COC. We're going to review them before they go on to HUD. I mean, make all our lives easier by paying attention to those threshold quality things, but have some reassurance of the fact that if something's off there, we'll let you know and give you the opportunity to address it, so that we're, again, we want to submit the strongest applications to HUD as possible. We want to keep as many resources in Rhode Island as we possibly can. We don't want to end up in a deficit situation at the end of this competition, although there may be some in Washington that would be just as happy if we were. So, okay, now onto some other changes. They basically, historic, I mean, like from the beginning of time, permanent supportive housing was only allowed to serve the literally homeless folks or those who are fleeing domestic violence situations. This year, they basically said permanent supportive housing can serve, literally homeless or people at risk of homelessness. Now, remember, we still have a coordinated entry system in Rhode Island. Just because HUD says you can serve a larger pool of people, that doesn't mean that within the COC that's going to be the policy. The policy is going to continue to be that we want to reserve things like permanent supportive housing to those who've got the highest needs, have the greatest need for that level of care. Used to be that you could, I don't know this, but this could be, if there are any first-time grants, it used to be that you could never reallocate a grant that had just been funded. It had to be renewed one time before you could reallocate that. HUD threw away that requirement. Those of you who are interested in the DV bonus program, it used to be that you could not submit a new transitional housing application under the DV bonus program. Now, transitional housing is an eligible activity for new DV bonus projects, and it may very well be that for people who are surviving and fleeing domestic violence, that transitional housing might actually be a valuable and useful program component. If you want to, a recipient can establish a preference to serve. I'm putting older individuals because that is given a couple of different ages at which one becomes elderly. For preferences, they're saying those 55 and older can have a preference for being served in projects, although you don't get any extra points for it, but you can establish that preference. However, if you want to bypass that 20 hours requirement of services or employment, you got to be at least 62. So, so people are 55 and 62, you're sort of getting a preference, but you still got to meet every other requirement. Um, those of you, we've heard about this a lot. Remember, one of these days, they're going to replace our housing quality standards that we've used almost from time immemorial, I think, since we moved out of the caves. And they're going to come up with this new approach towards evaluating the quality of the housing that people reside in, these NSPIRE standards. I mean, they have said this is going to start on October 1st of like the past 3 or 4 years. Now it's going to start on October 1st of 2026, maybe. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But be aware that sometime in the not too distant future, you're going to have to inspect your units using a slightly different approach and slightly different standards. And, you know, HUD has got this thing where you're going to have to, any applicant is going to have to sign these new certifications, one that you're not going to engage in racial preferences. They're very concerned that that we are, I'm going to say, okay, and also that you're not going to operate safe consumption, inject, you know, safe injection, needle exchange. There's certain elements of harm reduction that they find highly objectionable, and we're going to certify that we're not doing any, allowing any safe consumption sites in our housing projects. What's going on? No, 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 no. Come back. Okay, is that where I am? Okay, I guess it is. I guess that's where I am on the timeline. Okay, so we know we've extended the deadline. So you've got until the 22nd, which is a week from Monday, which is not, could be further away, but you know, we're working under these HUD NOFO deadlines as well. So we're expecting the new project applications to be done on the 2nd. We're going to do our best to be able to notify folks which new projects can be accepted by the 9th. We are hoping and praying that they get the eSNAPS system operational in the very, very near future so that it is a realistic goal to have our applications. And that would be both those applications that are going to submit a renewal for permanent housing, as well as those who are going to submit new project applications, all submitted in that eSNAP system by the end of July, which means for the most part, other than maybe minor revisions, you all will not have to worry about this stuff during the month of August. We'll have to worry about completing the COC application. We're hoping to have a list of the application and what our ranking list is done in draft form by the 10th of August. Again, the deadline is the 26th. If we make that, it'll give us plenty of time to get it completed. And the final deadline is the 26th. They tend not to change those deadlines. It really takes, you know, a huge thing. So I think that we can count on August 26th being the actual end date for this competition. And like I said, I did not have that much that I wanted to do slide-wise, so I'm going to stop the slides here and let's go and have a discussion.
Jennifer?
Thanks. Good morning. Thank you. This was really helpful. I just have a question about permanent supportive housing. One of the slides says that you can now serve category 2. Does that apply to renewals and new or just new?
So every year, when you submit the renewal application, you can make changes and you can make, so what you would have to do that, you would have to, as part of your project application, indicate that you're intending to change your project population. And you probably would also, you know, there's that project narrative that you do at the top of that screen. It's supposed to be a full description of the project. So if you were going to make that kind of a change, you probably want to make some reference to it in that project narrative as well. But that would be eligible as far as HUD is concerned.
Great. Thank you.
Hannah?
Thank you. I put it in the chat too, but I'm just going to read it out. So I noticed looking at the new Rhode Island Housing COC that there's some things added to street outreach, more explicitly stating your plans to work with law enforcement, the specific quote of places not meant for human habitation, and no safe consumption, or there's certain harm reduction language. Is there anything else from HUD's street outreach that would potentially differ from how street outreach like typically has worked in the past? Not saying that currently these ones don't, but I'm just like wondering if there's.
Other than wanting that coordination with law enforcement and first responders, and that, there is language in the point score about, taking action, about having various legislative things. But in terms of no other change in street outreach, no, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth?
I had a question about the budget form. On the second tab where it gets to staffing costs, at Rhode Island Housing, we have staff who do administrative and rental assistance activities, but not the eligible costs listed there of supportive services. So I just should I be listing those positions as well and just typing in like rental assistance there? And then are you looking for us to list the positions in our program? Our supportive services are provided as match. Are you looking for us to put the value of those and just list the totals as expense to other sources?
So my thought on that was that, I mean, first, the cost that you're trying, those little thing came in the email for Snaps competition that gets my attention for a second. So I lost my total.
Because I'm asking because obviously I can't. So I've budgeted on the first page for 50 unit, 1-bedroom units, which is what we're looking to do. And so I'm doing it, with the FMR value. So I know that I will, in actuality, pay my staffing costs out of that rental assistance budget line. So I don't want it to look like I'm adding costs. So I just didn't know, do you want me to leave them out altogether?
Yeah, I don't think you need to show those because as you are correctly saying, the costs for administering rental assistance are borne on the rental assistance budget line. I think that what we were really trying to get at is getting us a handle as to what the supportive services staffing would look like on the budget and be able to do some comparisons between different projects and maybe get into some cost reasonableness there.
Okay.
But
if all of my service positions are provided as match, are you still looking for me to list those there?
No,
do
I
you
don't.
think?
No, I don't think so. I think that you'll just as part of the match, you'll identify what that is.
Okay.
We again, I think it really is mostly about the reasonableness of both the staffing and the cost of the thing, and so therefore, what we really would want to look at is what the COC finding is.
Great, thank you.
Nick?
Just trying to balance the need to potentially add more staffing. We have currently existing transitional housing. They ask about things like client to case manager ratio, and there are these larger requirements for providing individualized service plans and support. So I'm trying to sort of balance, do I want to add more staff to my programs and increase the cost of the application? It sounds like what you said is more expensive projects will be weighted down. Or do I want to come in with a plan that I think is viable, but maybe has less of a robust staffing plan?
A couple, I mean, HUD, bless their hearts, go every which way on this. Right now, they're going very much with an incentive towards services. And indeed, in terms of the scoring factors for the COC score, one of the scoring factors is whether or not 30% of our annual renewal demand is devoted towards services in terms of the applications that we're submitting. So they really want us to spend, or will incentivizing us to spend more money on services. That could mean that if you're like transitioning from an existing project to a new TH project, might mean that you have fewer units because you have to have a higher staffing thing to meet the services requirement. I mean, if that's the case, then that's what you should do, because HUD is going to grade you and monitor you on your ability to provide the level of required services. And
I mean, I think I can put all of the funding requests or most of the funding requests in the sort of operational category going to the support staff either way. So that's going to be my ask. I'm not going to, we're using matching funds for sort of operating the house, the facilities side. So I think it's really just a question of like, do I want to throw in another case manager or another job coach, increase the cost of the ask, or have a slightly less built out staffing plan?
Well, one thing we always say is that the amount that you request is the amount that you request. It is likely, especially on new projects, that because we're not colluding, we're not all getting together and making sure that our applications end up adding up to the right number. So therefore, come in with a number that works for you. The possibility is strong that the COC will come back to you saying, great, but we can't fund that as well as all the other things that we need to fund. You need to trim the budget a little, in which case, we can go back and make those adjustments. So I think in the initial one, ask for what you think is going to take in order to do a quality program. We'll see how the budgets shake out. If we can't fund them all, then we'll come back and see if you can, sharpen your pencil a little.
So sorry, just to clarify, in the first round of ranking that's going to happen at the state level, we're not necessarily going to be like ranked out because even if we score high, but our budget is on the higher end, you could come back to us and say, you got a lot of points, but we need you to trim your budget.
Exactly. It's a great project, great proposal, perfect, except for the fact that we had 8 other great proposals and we want to fund them all. So therefore, can you adjust the budget? Or we get 5 other great proposals, in which case we have the resources. So don't cut your hair before we need to.
Okay, very helpful. Thanks.
Kirsten? Hi, just to piggyback on that. So I was under the impression if we're doing a transition project that would normally be a renewal, we don't have to use the 2025, what our 2025 total was for that project. We can go higher or lower.
Thank you, Christian. That's a really good question, and I may have misled a little. No, if you're doing a transition application, basically you want to work with the budget amount that's shown on the grant inventory worksheet for your grant. Those would be your funds. So what you could do again is, you could increase the staffing by reducing the number of units if you needed to do. You can play with the budget as best you can to make it work. But no, you're right. I mean, to do that and unfortunately, they won't let you do a transition and expand at the same time. So you'll have to be working with that budget figure, potentially next year. We could come back and expand the grant if it was necessary to do that.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to confirm. That's what I thought.
Yeah,
I have a couple of other
right.
budget questions. So kind of along the same lines as Elizabeth, if we're doing a transitional housing program and we're going to charge the 30% of income, how do we show that program income on the budget page?
Yeah, it's going to be, again, they haven't opened up these snaps. On our thing.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at the budget. I'm not immediately sure the answer to that question.
Okay. Because it automatically, calculates the full FMR in the budget worksheet. So I wasn't sure where to put that.
I think you wouldn't put it on the budget, Kirsten, because I think you just make that clear in your application where in the narratives where it says to talk about your match source. I think you just talk about program income and your intent to charge 30% of the rent, because HUD is going to make you apply for full FMR on the units.
Okay.
If you're in that,
so we just don't
in that category.
Don't calculate it on the okay.
I think so. I mean, Howard, check my thinking
what's
on
going to happen when you go into eSnaps, when we ultimately can get in there, the first one of the budget forms is going to ask you that question, and is going to ask you how much program income you are, basically, because you're going to say you want to apply to match, I'm sure. And it's going to ask you how much program income it is that you intend to use for that purpose. And that's how you can show that figure.
Yeah. And it asks you to do a value and then to justify it if it's like previous years. And so you'll just talk about charging 30%. rent.
Okay.
And
So
that's how
for
you
the
change that.
COC application, I'll just put it in the narrative. I don't
Yeah.
need to worry about having it in the budget. Okay.
Yep.
And then second, another budget question. So under the staffing, so say we have under the supportive services list, there's like the mental health services or say substance abuse services. But if we have in-house, we have our own staff providing those services, then they're gonna in order to collect the indirect, they need to go up in the case management line item. Is that okay? Because if I put that staff
Yeah.
amount down under those
Yeah.
other two, it doesn't calculate any indirect for them, but they're staff, so they are eligible for indirect.
Well, I think you do what you're saying is put them in the case. And basically, the way they've written it, you cannot. There are certain supportive services costs that would not qualify under the modified total direct costs, and it has to do with those kinds of treatment costs and stuff like that. But case
Right,
management
okay.
is allowable, and it's your individual session with your case manager. I mean, I think they're going to be able to talk about a variety of topics.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah.
And then I just have one last, well, hopefully one last question. There might be more, but I just wanted to clarify, and I have talked to Rosa a little bit about this, but I just wanted to hear from you. If we're proposing a new SSO project, what should we say in the COC application? I'm unclear on how to describe the service agreement requirement, the 20 hours a week, because if it's SSO, then yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to do it for SSO. I mean, the requirement, well, first of all, the 20 hours is just for transitional housing.
Right.
There's a sense in permanent housing, we want folks to say that they will participate in the services because there are points in the COC application for that. But SSO, I mean, basically, in order for a person to be a participant in an SSO project, they've got to participate, they've got to be enrolled in a services program. So the assumption
Okay.
is that as long as they have any kind of contact with the program, they're participating.
Okay, so we do check off that they will be having a services agreement, but and then we can just explain though that they won't be have to do the 20-hour.
No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Hannah?
Thanks. This kind of relates back to the question about like putting in as much for the budget, putting in the high budget that we think we want for that first round. But that also means like right now we're not as specific on outcomes, like exactly how many people we'd serve. And I know that would make us more federally fundable to have those specific outcomes. How important is it to have that for this round right now, to have like numbers hit that correlate to each of those?
Will you be applying for services only or
For
a
street
house?
outreach and
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, given that, I mean, I think you can, certainly if we're talking about housing project, we're talking about number of units, number of units of rental
Yeah.
assistance and stuff. We have to have a sense as to the number of people served. Street outreach or SSO, I think you can, you can be a little vaguer, especially at this initial thing till we see what
Okay.
each snap says, because again, you can try and engage as many people as you can, but who knows?
Yeah.
Depending on where you go, who you're going to, who you will encounter. So I think in that project type, that's reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
Nicole?
My question is really simple. And actually, I apologize. I joined a few minutes late, so you may have already covered it right at the beginning of the meeting today. I'm just wondering, so under the revised RFP that was released a few days ago, under scoring criteria for supportive service only project applications, the lettering conventions got a little weird. Whereas it was like A through J before, it now restarts at A after letter G. Is that the way that we should be writing these? Or should we just continue to go down the line like a regular alphabetical?
Yeah. Assume that Microsoft Word did us in.
Okay.
Did as bad as it often does when we try
Great.
to edit these documents.
Not great, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Of course. I see we had a question in the chat from Tyler. Just to confirm, SSO project participants do not need to be residents of COC funded residences. That's correct. That is exactly right. They don't need to be people already living in COC funded developments or units. And actually, HUD's priority for these projects are people who are unhoused or have a history of being unhoused. And then I see a hand from Vicky.
Good morning. I have a question around SSO enhanced service projects, specifically thinking about trying to do employment training, one-on-one job coaching, and paid work experiences for people in transitional housing. And we wanted to try to define the population that we would serve as ages 18 to 26. So, one, would that type of project in general be allowed as a new SSO project? And two, can we define that population without having to use YHDP dollars?
Yeah, you can definitely serve I mean, obviously, like you stops at 25, but you can serve a young adult population through a regular COC grant. I mean, YHDP, you can only serve youth and young adults under YHDP, but regular COC funds can certainly be used to serve a young adult population.
Thanks.
Vicky, I know you had another question earlier in the week that we said, we can definitely chat about here. So Howard, I'm curious what you think. Foster Forward has a few existing grants. A couple of them are rapid rehousing, and their intention is to submit to transition them to transitional housing. However, as an existing grantee, they're tied to their existing renewal amount. And so they were struggling to figure out how do they fit in the intensive services needed within their funding amount. And they were wondering, are they eligible to submit a new SSO project application for things like intensive employment support, job coaching, and other services? Or would that be viewed as duplicative because they would have another award?
I'm not sure I follow exactly.
Okay.
Now, do you have more than one award now? And so you could, now this might not be what you want to do. A transition application could include more than one grant. You could take more than one grant and combine them together into a single new application for transition. I don't know whether that, it sounds like you could do that and you still would need additional resources beyond that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
In which case you'd have to submit a new SS. You do that transition and then you'd have to submit an additional application that would be a new SSO application. And if it's got that employment focus that you talked about, I think we can make it work. There is, I mean, and it came up at the NA, and I mean, there are certainly challenges about SSO projects that might serve people who are housed elsewhere because those folks might not meet the homeless definition. And at the same time, they're putting such a focus on employment and having increased income from employment, especially for residents of transitional housing. But I think if it has got that focus, and we craft the wording correctly, we might be able to squeeze it through.
Okay, thanks.
And Bill's here, I see. And his hand.
Hello. I may have missed something, but do we know rankings have not been released yet for this year, right? And if not, when might those happen?
So performance scores have not been announced yet. The timeline for that was just finalized. I'm pulling up my timeline document right now. So it looks like June 26th is going to be the last day to run scoring for your existing projects in Clarity. And then just looking through this. So scores will be posted by July 10th.
Thank you.
Kirsten?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what Victoria is asking because I had the same thoughts, but basically a new SSO project cannot provide services for a client, say, that's already in a transitional housing program. Because I know, I mean, like when the phrase enhanced services
Yeah.
kind of feels like this should be where we kind of put these other extra enhanced services that are being required. But you're saying that those if someone's already in a transitional housing program, they can't receive funding from that enhanced services SSO grant.
They certainly can't be duplicative of anything that they're receiving. I mean, so I certainly wouldn't come in with case management or anything like that, which we would naturally expect to be part of a PH project. We're going to hopefully get some more guidance from HUD. I think there again could be a slight opening if we're talking about a very specific service that's really critical to, as in the employment thing, to the goals of the COC that's not otherwise being provided by that project. I think there's a chance we can get those in.
Yeah, because I think what I was hearing was that it would be a grant specifically for employment services, and maybe that's something that's not offered under the TH project.
Yep.
Okay.
Same thing. I mean, maybe, we could go. It'd be depending on how the TH thing is. I mean, I'm thinking about maybe substance use disorder treatment services and things like that, which it could be that a standard residential program is not as equipped to provide that service, so it could be a specialized thing, but could be riskier depending because the focus of the TH could be to help people attain sobriety, in which case it wouldn't make sense to have a separate grant to do that.
I have another question, and this may not be something you can answer because this would be more like later on once a grant's received. So if you say you're awarded a transition grant and you have that first year to transition, say, clients from rapid rehousing or units from rapid rehousing to transitional housing, do you know what will it look like when we're still paying rent, say, for 6 months of that year? But are we paying that rent from the leasing funds of the new transition grant, or does that transition year need to include both rental assistance funds and leasing funds? Because in that transition year, you're technically paying both.
Yeah, so your budget should only show what it's going to be after transition. So if you're moving from rental assistance to leasing because it's moving into a transitional housing model, your budget is only going to show those dollars in the leasing budget line, but you'll be allowed to spend them on rental assistance basically until the end. I mean, assuming it's tenant-based rental assistance, the lease term is going to end at some point, and as soon as that lease term ends, you're going to switch over from being tenant-based rental assistance to leasing with the lease in your name. But don't when you're applying to HUD and for the application, show it all as if it was fully transitioned. So just show the leasing budget and show if there's a higher supportive services budget, what that would look like.
Okay.
I see another question in the chat. Will providers be able to receive referrals from other providers, treatment programs, healthcare providers, DOC, shelters, or must all referrals originate through coordinated entry? So for housing projects, referrals do have to come from coordinated entry. For supportive services only, that is not the case. You can accept referrals from other providers as described in the question. Jennifer?
Thought I understood this, but now based on the conversation, I'm confused. So the prior question about transitional housing and then a separate SSO grant raised for me the question, we have an existing grant that we are going to, I guess it's reallocate to supportive services only. I understand it can't be tied to a housing project, but we are putting it forth as housing stability. And if those folks are already in the housing, does that make them ineligible?
It might. It might, especially again, housing stability would be sort of one of those core things that would be provided by a TH or other projects. So yeah, if that's the focus and they're in housing, it might question whether those folks are eligible to be served.
And just to give the full context of it, we have a significant permanent supportive housing grant that we will be applying at a reduced amount. And our thought was to move those supportive services dollars and use SSO and use and sort of help us reduce the grant that way. But it's sounding like that might not work. And maybe that's a detailed offline conversation, but I'm a little extra worried now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, probably somewhat rightly so. I mean, if the goal, and again, some of that strategy might have be left over when we had that 30% cap on permanent housing renewals, and we had to, save the units. And a lot of people were looking at pulling services out of those budgets, and so what with not having that 30% cap, it may be that your project will fit within the 60% of ARD and be able to be in tier 1.
So just to be really clear what you mean, Howard, I think what you're saying is permanent supportive housing projects that have historically had conversations with Rosa and Sarah and were told because of the 30% cap, Rhode Island Housing was one of them, would likely have to reduce our budget by 30, to meet that 30% cap. I think what you're telling us now is that we could reach out to Sarah and Rosa and have a conversation, and that might have changed, which would allow like somebody in Jennifer's situation to keep those services being provided to those clients in housing in the same application. And that might have been a change now that we've seen the new NOFO. Is that all accurate?
Yes.
And Sarah, would you like us to reach out to you and use your little scheduling thing to have those conversations?
Yes, that would be great. So there is on our website, and I'll drop the link to the page I'm talking about in our chat once I'm finished speaking. There's a funding opportunities tab on our website. And once you click that, there's information about this RFP. There's also a link to book time with me. So you don't have to, reference get my availability. You can just click that link and my availability is there and you can book time with me. Oh, thank you, Rosa. She dropped the link in the chat. So yeah, if you click that link and then you go to that page, you'll see the link. It says book time with Sarah St. Laurent. And so you can just set up a half an hour time to connect with me. So please do that.
We're getting positive reaction from the crowd. Nick?
I think this was answered, but just to clarify, so we're not putting leveraged expenses in the template budget, right? Like that's just the amount of money we're asking for.
Yeah, that's what we want to know now. Yep.
So if we have other staff that are working on this project, that's not showing up in the budget template. I mean, should we be describing like the total cost of the project in dollars in the narrative then, so you get a sense of exactly how much money we're...
And certainly the narrative, if you're leveraging other resources, I would definitely describe that in the narrative for sure.
Okay, great. And then
the source.
Okay. And then quick question, can we apply for like a sort of scattered site permanent supportive housing model as a new project? Is that sort of a viable model within this?
It's allowable. It's going to be ranked lower than a new TH or a new SSO project. And so a little less likely to be funded.
Okay. Right.
HUD says one of their goals of this process, they think that the COC program needs to be more balanced, and rather than having the close to the exclusive focus on permanent housing, they want to see the mix of permanent, transitional, and emergency housing. So They're really trying to rebalance, as it were, through this competition. So it's going to make a new PSH harder.
Okay.
Are there any hands or questions in the chat that we have missed? Please speak up. We want to make sure we get to everyone. Anyone having any thoughts that it's like, I must be the only one thinking this? Because you're probably not the only one thinking it.
I'm thinking this is incredibly, incredibly complicated.
Same, girl.
Thank you,
Same.
Sarah. Thank you, John. I saw your thumbs up. Oh, okay. See.
Yes, this is making my brain hurt. You know, I've always been very, very proud of my big, beautiful brain, but oof, she hurts. It's rough. So thank you all for hanging in with us. You know, we couldn't do this work without you. Bill?
Yeah, I guess I'll share this. As much as I absolutely hate to admit this and completely disagree with much of the NOFO and the premises, it's really clear that HUD and the Trump administration is getting their shit together, and that's really scary. This is unfortunately the most competent document I've seen from them, and they're clearly learning lessons, and that's really frightening.
And now I'm going to act presidential. Oh. Oh. All right, I'm done.
Thanks, Howard. Needed that.
My pants are fine, by the way.
Because there's such a quick turnaround, is there any chance to sit down with anyone and just make sure our application for our new project is hitting all of the right spots? Or is this just like go in with what you got?
You can definitely reach out to us. You can use, you know, that booking link, anything you want to talk about related to the competition. Feel free to use my booking link and set up time.
Yep.
All right. And where's your booking link again? Sorry, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, it's on our funding opportunities page. Rosa dropped a link in the meeting
Perfect.
chat here. And so if you click that link to go to our funding opportunities page, there's a paragraph that comes up before the drop downs, and it says, you know, to set up time to meet with Sarah, use this link.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And if you have any trouble finding it or the link doesn't work for you, just send me an email.
Will
And
you
I
also
also-
be up? Sorry, I was just going to say, ask, are you also going to be updating the FAQs?
Yes. Yes, we've been
Okay.
taking notes today about questions and we'll update the FAQs.
I also wanted to add to Hannah's question. So right now, through this RFP process, we can support and answering questions about what would be like eligible, those types of things. But then once a program is ranked and selected to continue, there's going to be additional support that we're going to provide to those applicants that are selected. And if they happen to be a new applicant and like a new COC, new to COC, there's going to be additional information sessions to help you and guide you to fill up an eSteps application. So just wanted to let you know that there's going to be support throughout the competition process.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Vicky?
I just realized I have another question. When I was looking at the prioritization of what is going to be in tier 1 and tier 2, we currently are operating a SSO as a drop-in center for youth through the YHDP grant. I know that that is a renewable item because we're not going to like have to transition it to any other type because that type is a renewable project type, excuse me. Am I to understand that it's actually going to fall lower in tier 2 than the renewal or new projects that are going to be transition grants?
So those were the ranking and reallocation policy was passed by the board last night, and so those SSO YHB projects that cannot transition to another project type and can renew, they would be considered in tier 1.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm.
Does anyone else have thoughts or questions?
We have no doubt that as you get into your applications, may very well be other things that come up. So please, as you know, reach out to Sarah. I'll do our best to get responses to you as quickly as possible. Sorry for all of this. Wish it was more normal.
Same. I want to echo that. I wish that we were in more of a precedented time. I wish things were going more like they have historically gone for the continuum of care. But we're very grateful for all of our providers, all interested applicants. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for asking questions, for keeping your eyes on your email, for really paying attention to all of the information that we're putting out. We couldn't operate these programs without all of you. So thank you for your partnership. Continue to reach out. However we can support you, we want to. Like Rosa said, there'll be support all the way through the process. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that you all are able to apply for funding and operate your program successfully. But let us know how else we can be supporting you. You can call, you can email, you can use my booking link. You could send smoke signals. I live in Westerly if you're going to send those. But that was a little flippant. But seriously, reach out to me however you need to contact me. If you have emailed me and I haven't gotten back to you, I promise I'm not ignoring you. Bump it again, send me another ping and say, hey, you didn't answer me, just checking in. Get in touch with me. We really want to be supportive. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Be well, thanks.
Thank you.